so yes, I'm going to talk about behavioural pathways to the bursting of the carbon bubble. So I agree with Elizabeth, but investors don't know enough about climate change at the moment, but I've got a theory as to why, which is slightly different from just needing more information. So basically, just to give you a quick background, I have spent 10 years in the corporate sustainability sector, engaging with companies at M&S, PwC, and WWF, and then went to study a Masters in Environmental Economics at the LSE. All my career, I've been trying to make change within companies on the environment. And so when I went to the LSE to study economics and came across behavioural economics, I became really fascinated that these two things could come together, and so started to look at how you create change and why change isn't happening, and why businesses aren't moving as fast as they could be, and then came across this issue about the carbon bubble. So that's what I'm going to focus on today, and this is the notion that under a sort of 2-degree-ish scenario, the asset price of fossil fuels drops through the floor and a carbon bubble bursts in the market. I may or may not talk about a few scenarios that I stole from Howard, who spoke earlier. I'll talk about my hypothesis, the evidence I've got for my hypothesis, and the implications. Now, I focus on fossil fuel, the carbon bubble and fossil fuels, because according to my research, actually, I think Nick put up the figure of 7.4 trillion, but I mean, these are just huge, big figures. 3 trillion was the number that I came up with in terms of the amount of equity and debt that's in the top 200 fossil fuel companies at the moment, slightly scaled down to account for the fact that many of those companies don't only invest in fossil fuels or don't only own fossil fuels. And so to put that in context, the value of the mortgage derivatives bubble that burst and caused the world's worst financial crisis was 650 billion in 2007, according to the US government. So it's quite an interesting subject, isn't it, when you put it like that. Now, I'm not. I'm just going to quickly say, why do people think that the carbon bubble won't burst? And I'm not going to whiz on to my slide about this because it will give away the game. But basically, there are a few reasons why my husband, who's a mining banker, thinks that the carbon bubble won't burst. Firstly, it's usually 2 degrees or anything even approximated at 3 degrees. It's just not going to happen. You know, the government's not going to make policy in time. Technology's not going to happen, and so we don't need to worry about the carbon bubble bursting. In that scenario, you have to worry a lot about other things like the planet being really in serious trouble. But you know, that's one thing that people say. I'm an optimist, so I believe that the technology in particular is coming down the line, and so rapid decarbonisation could still happen. Other people say that because of your discounted cash flow methodology, things that happen in 10, 20, 30 years' time, these policies that sort of slowly come in, they're not going to impact on my valuation of my fossil fuel company today, because I've still got, 10, 15, 20 years of, normal cash flows, and so I don't need to worry about it. Again, the longer we put off policy and the more sort of long-term and slowly drip-feeding policy is, the more likely I think there is to be a carbon bubble, because at some point we're going to get to the stage where we realise we've done what Howard calls delay and panic, which is we leave it, there's a big climate catastrophe, and then we realise we've really got to do something really, really quickly. But anyway, the third reason, which Nick talked about earlier, was the efficient market hypothesis. Katie, don't be stupid. Markets are all knowing and all seeing, and they will take on all the information that they need, all the information that's out there, and they'll effectively price into the asset prices in the market all these risks, and so there will be no bubble. And that's what I'm going to challenge today. So first, I wanted to quickly look at what is a bubble. I don't come from the financial sector. But very simplistically, here's what the FT.com lexicon says. And what the industry as a whole thinks of when they think of a bubble, and that's the price of securities or other assets rising sharply at a sustained rate so that they exceed valuations justified by their fundamentals, at which point a bubble bursts. Now, this is sort of important because when you're talking to the industry, you've got to talk their language, and if you talk about massively increasing asset values at the moment in fossil fuels, they'll laugh you out of the room. So one of the things I think we need to do in the stranded asset world is sort of think about this sort of new type of bubble, a carbon bubble or a stranded asset bubble, which is where the fundamental values of assets deviate from their price because the fundamentals are eroding. The price might be staying the same, the price might be going down, but the fundamentals are eroding, and that's creating the gap. And it might sound like semantics, or it might sound like an obvious point, but when you're looking, from my point of view, from the behavioural and psychological mechanisms that are causing these bubbles, or these big deviations in the market from between price and fundamentals, it's really, really key as to whether you're talking about overinflation and a hyping up or an under-deflation and an inertia of the system. So Robert Shiller's a famous economist who's won the Nobel Prize in Economics for talking about something called irrational exuberance. It's the behavioural and psychological factors that have created bubbles in the past. And he talks about a number of things that have led to this, led to these bubbles that have burst all throughout history. He talks about times of great structural change and uncertainty, like the internet causing the dot-com bubble. He talks about the power of story, the media, the sentiment in the market, the hyping up of stocks, and the power of the story to infect even the most clever of investors, like a thought virus. Where they come to believe their own hype. And even when they stop believing that the price is actually reflecting the fundamental values, then you get overconfidence. Actually, I know that in the end this bubble's going to burst, but I don't care because I can still make money and I am a better investor than everyone else, and I'm going to beat the gun and I'm going to sell out before the bubble bursts. And this is how you get growing bubbles. So bubbles are a product of over-inflation of prices above the asset fundamentals, and that's what we've seen in the past, irrational exuberance. But this, to me, doesn't really ring true when you're thinking about the carbon bubble or other stranded asset bubbles. We are in times of great structural change, no doubt, but the power of the story, we've just been talking about, the media hardly covering us at all apart from the dear old Guardian. I'll argue that overconfidence, investors knowing that there's going to be a big crash in fossil fuels and thinking that they're all going to be wiped out, but thinking, I'll stay in for now because I can still make a bit of money. That's a plausible scenario, but I don't think that's the case. I really do think that what we've got at play is not irrational exuberance, but something I've called irrational apathy. And so this is my irrational apathy pathway, and it basically says, sort of what Nick and Elizabeth have talked about, there's an apathy in the city towards climate change. People personally don't feel that climate change is a serious issue for them. They don't think it's a serious issue for business. They don't think it's a serious issue for their investments. And this leads to something called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is our subconscious tendency to seek out and interpret information in a way which fits our current values and our current beliefs. So there's a very famous study where a group of students were asked, what's your view on capital punishment? And they said they were either for or against. And then they were given a number of articles to read. And those that were for capital punishment believed that those articles justified their position. And those that were against capital punishment also believed that those articles justified their position. And one interesting thing about this bias is that more information, more learning can actually strengthen the bias. So it's not just about provision of more information to people in the city. We've got to find ways to overcome these sort of psychological, cultural barriers to just believing that climate change isn't an issue. And so, in my pathway then, you've got a load of apathetic investors. Confirmation bias is causing them to irrationally interpret and analyse the information they receive about climate change. And in a scenario where we have rapid decarbonisation, strong policy, strong technology, this leads the market to underreact to the unburnable carbon risk and a carbon bubble to burst. So I also surveyed a load of investors, and I was quite pleased to see that our surveys didn't say completely contradictory things. I only got 65 investment professionals. I did a short online survey, and I looked at first their personal attitudes towards climate change and compared those to the national population. And then I wanted to look at impact on their professional behaviour. And so how I did this was just a really simple quiz. I asked the respondents, did they know about current technology or policy around climate change mitigation that was in place today, to give me some kind of clues about whether there is an irrational assimilation of information in the market. So my first piece of evidence for my carbon bubble hypothesis, irrational apathy. How serious a threat is climate change to your family, developed countries, developing countries? And this sort of goes to this cultural issue we've been talking about. I compared the investors in my study to the general population. This was a study done by Ipsos Mori where I used the same questions that they'd used. And investors were statistically significantly, less concerned about climate change for them, for developed countries and for developing countries. And so this is my feeling that there's an apathy in the city towards the issue of climate change itself, which is nothing to do with how they invest in a rational world, but has everything to do with it in a behavioural world. So this is then the second piece of evidence where I found that there was a lack of knowledge of market-relevant information about climate change policy and technology, a systematic underestimation of the current impacts of these policies and technologies, and knowledge. In fact, 80% of my respondents were fossil fuel investors or investment professionals, and their knowledge was no better than general investors or investors in other sectors. So I'm going to just do the quiz now, and I'm going to not put up the correct answer until you guys have had a little think about it, because it might be that you don't know the answers either, in which case we can give the investors a break. So the first one was, please estimate the percentage of coal reserves that could not be burned under a global policy scenario which aims for 2 degrees. And with all of these, with most of them, there's some room for interpretation in terms. So I wasn't looking for a single figure, but it's just what do they estimate versus what's the sort of current consensus. So current consensus for coal is 80%. Investors, actually, this was the one that they got the most right. Their mean answer was 58%. What's the percentage of the UK's total energy generation in 2040 which came from renewable power? Anyone want to guess?
12.
Oh dear. The correct answer is 19.2%, and the mean answer from investors was 13.8%. The percentage reduction in the UK carbon emissions by 2050 versus 1990, which the UK has written into law, the UK Climate Change Act. Come on, we must have some people in the audience that know this one. Exactly, I'm glad you said that. 80. What did investors say? 35. And this is interesting because actually what Elizabeth was saying about regulation, I think at the moment the mindset in the investment community is very much focused on regulation in general, not climate change regulation. So they think risks are coming down the line from regulation, but actually, when later on I'm going to talk about, when I ask them about climate change regulation, do they believe it's going to happen? Absolutely not. And so, they're just long-term policy like this. Don't need to read about that, so need to know about it. What is the minimum price, if any, that a UK power station currently, and this was April 2015, has to pay to emit 1 tonne of carbon? Correct answer was £23, because that included the UK government's floor price plus the price of permits on the EU ETS auction, and the mean answer was £15.4. And lastly, when is solar power expected to be fully competitive with coal in at least 75% of US states? And this was according to Wood Mackenzie. So, Wood Mackenzie are big industry consultants, so I don't expect them to over-exaggerate or lie. So I gave them that information to sort of help them to think what their answer might be. Correct answer, 50 years, mean answer, 21 years. But actually, yeah, there was a big spread in this one, and a lot of investors were much, much higher than that. So investors are apathetic. Investors, I believe, don't know enough about the policy and the technologies that are currently in place. And the current sentiment, only 50% of investors believe that 2 degrees C is needed. The question was, scientists believe that it is, governments believe that it is. It wasn't as sort of provocative as this, but basically this is what scientists say, this is what governments have come up with. Do you think it is? 50%, only 50% believe it's necessary. 86% of investors said they don't believe that governments will deliver the policies to deliver 2 degrees. And interestingly, 50% of investors said that they do not take climate change into account at all in investment decisions at the moment. But that also implies that 50% do. And all my respondents that I shared this with afterwards were very surprised that even 50% would be taking it into account at all. So I think the current market sentiment is there is not going to be rapid decarbonisation. And so when you combine that with, this is what we think now, our thoughts about climate change and the current sentiment impact on how we analyse information. And there's some evidence in my study to say they're not absorbing the information that's out there already, means that in the event of rapid decarbonisation, rapid policy, rapid technology coming down the line, the finance industry is going to be taken by surprise. I think Howard mentioned that sort of thought earlier as well. And so irrational apathy prevails. So I'll just skip to the implications. The first one, which I haven't got up here, that I was talking about with my husband earlier, is actually on regulation. There's been a huge amount of discussion, less action, but there has been some action around trying to regulate the finance industry. This is what everyone cares about at the moment in the finance industry when you talk about risk. There's been a lot of action to regulate against irrational exuberance. There's been a lot of discussion about how we can rein that irrational exuberance in. And in fact, if stranded assets are going to bubbles or risks that come from irrational apathy, then that regulation isn't going to protect the financial markets. Furthermore, talking to the guys who are looking at this at the Bank of England, one of the things that worries me is that investor attitudes are as they are, and market sentiment is as it is, and so prices are where they are. And this is a huge systemic risk, which in fact could provide yet another excuse for George Osborne not to do anything about climate change. And it's this sort of slightly self-defeating argument, but I think it's really quite a serious risk that that's the conclusion that the government comes to when it looks at this type of thing. But very much agree with Elizabeth that there needs to be more information, but when you look from a behavioural point of view, that information has to come from the right people. It has to come from Howard, how brilliant that, city veteran like Howard can stand up and talk about climate change so effectively, and, him going in and talking to people in the city is just going to have such a much bigger impact than 1,000 WWFers and Greenpeaces and whatever knock on their door, because if it is these social norms and if it is these behavioural biases that are leading to this apathy, then this is what we need to change social norms. It's leadership in the industry, it's the right type of education that manages to change mindsets, and we've got to use the insights from behavioural economics to work out how best to do that. And then finally, one of the interesting things is that investors actually were more positive about technology getting us to 2 degrees or thereabouts. So whereas 86% of investors said governments aren't going to get us there, it was only 56% of investors that thought that technology wasn't going to get us there. So it might be that going and talking to investors about technology, educating around the technology that's coming down the line actually offers a better route to changing hearts and minds than going and talking to them about policy, which they are just totally cynical about, and George Osborne's doing a very good job of making them more and more cynical every day. And so, just in terms of the wider stranded assets conference, I think there's lots of things that we can learn from this research and these thoughts around carbon and the sort of sentiment in the city about green issues, that sort of thing, and sort of apply them to other areas of stranded assets as well. Thank you.